Hello and welcome to the WPAOG podcast. This episode features an interview with Major General Paul Stanton, class of 1995, Commanding General of the United States Army Cyber Center of Excellence and Fort Gordon. Prior to his promotion in June 2021, Major General Stanton was Deputy Commanding General Operations of U.S. Army Cyber Command. He graduated from the U.S. Military Academy at West Point in 1995 and commissioned as a second lieutenant in the Infantry. He transitioned from infantry to the cyber branch in 2015. Major General Stanton has earned 3 degrees in computer science, a bachelor's degree from the U.S. Military Academy, a master's degree from the University of Illinois, and a doctorate from Johns Hopkins University. In this episode, Major General Stanton talks about the different pathways into a career in Army cyber, the ever-changing nature of modern warfare, and why he believes cyberspace operations is the ultimate team sport. Now, please enjoy this interview between Major General Paul Stanton, First Lieutenant John Thomas, class of 2021, and your host, Brigadier General Brian Vile, class of 1994.
Good afternoon, sir. Hey, so a couple of questions that we'd like to start off with. So first off, could you talk a little bit about your decision to attend West Point?
I was digging through some stuff in my parents' basement, and my mom doesn't get rid of anything. And she had this folder of notes that I had made and pictures I had drawn as a kid. And I drew a picture when I was, I think, 4 years old that was me as an Army man. My dad served for his entire life. He retired a couple of years ago, and I always wanted to be in the Army. And what better place to start an Army career than at West Point? So I'd say that I was a gray hog while I was still in high school.
Can you talk generally, how did your time at West Point prepare you for the Army? What did West Point teach you?
Oh, boy. Yeah, so, I think probably the most significant change in my life, not that I didn't grow up in a disciplined household, I can assure you that I did, but there's a different kind of discipline that you learn from West Point. How do you discipline yourself to get up early, to study late, to get your PT in when you're already tired? I think that discipline was certainly reinforced at West Point. And then I learned that through individual effort combined with teamwork can lead to success. I grew up playing sports. I was a member of a team. You always think about trying to give 110% of your individual effort, but the discipline to provide your own individual effort combined with the teamwork that you learn at West Point set the foundation and conditions for success in the Army. Because frankly, you need both. You have to be part of a team, and you have to know where you fit such that you can bring your teammates and their efforts up alongside yours and, frankly, move the ball down the road. Let me flip the question to you. What was the most significant aspect that you learned about yourself as a cadet?
Yeah, wow, that's a great question, sir. So it's interesting because why did I go to West Point? It's because I wanted to join the Army and my parents wanted me to go to college. And it was my junior ROTC instructor in high school that steered me into it. I didn't even know that West Point existed as an institution. So showing up, I really just want to get to an Army, but really what I ended up learning at West Point, and I think the vast majority of what I really needed to know as a successful leader, I learned in the first week. It just took me a whole heck of a lot longer to internalize it, but it was all about being a leader. What does it take to be a leader? My favorite, Schofield's definition of discipline.
How many gallons of water in Lusk Reservoir? You picked that up in the first week, right?
Well, it's interesting the things you carry out. So, worst battalion orders, Schofield's definition of discipline. But for the love of God, I can't remember how many million gallons in Lusk Reservoir or how many lights in Cullum Hall.
Josh is a lot younger than us. Josh, how many lights in Cullum Hall? Did you have to memorize that during your first week?
We did have to memorize it, sir, but it's been a while. I can tell you how the cow is, but I don't remember how many lights there are. I'm sorry.
So, Josh, why did you decide to go to West Point?
So, sir, similar to you, I also didn't know what West Point was. I'd never heard of it. I always wanted to play football in college, and one of the coaches reached out to me, did a little research, and Really, once I learned more about the mission of West Point, type of people that they produce, I just really fell in love with the institution and the mission there.
No, that's outstanding. So now we're going to get into the juicy stuff. So as a cadet, how many hours did you have?
Josh, that's to you first.
I actually never walked any hours, sir.
Does your diploma even count if you didn't walk hours?
Well, sir, I was never caught.
I didn't walk as many as I sat. I sat more than a few hours.
So 44 hours total. I'm trying to remember what my 44 hours were for.
I walked 8 and I think I sat 30. So, Brian, you're the winner here.
Sir, I don't think that was ever in question.
Do either of you remember what you did to get your hours?
Shaving cream bomb for 20 of them before Sammy, if you even know what a weekend inspection was. I think I got another 20 for showing up late, and then the other 4, I have no clue.
Yeah, all of mine were for being late in some regard. I returned from pass late. I returned from leave late, all because of traffic on I-95. I mean, if I never have to travel I-95 again in my lifetime, it'll be a good day. But accidents and traffic on I-95, getting back to formation late. And then as a firstie, I was making sure that all of my friends were in their rooms. And meanwhile, the TAC was waiting for me and mine. So I got a couple hours for that too. But I got to sit my hours as a firstie. So those were just opportunities to get my homework done and figure out what it meant to write code back in the day.
So unfortunately, I was a slug, so I walked the vast majority of mine. But let's follow up on that. So Josh, I'll come to you first. So what sports did you play, or what did you do while you were at the academy?
My plebe year, I played football. Yuck year, I was on the boxing team. And then after that, I played handball for my company. What about you, sir?
Yeah, so for me, it's interesting. They made me play basketball my first year, which is a sport I've never played before and will never play again. And then I did boxing for 3 years and Sandhurst for 3 or 4 years. But it was intramural boxing. I don't think we had a travel team yet. And then, sir, got to go to you.
Yeah, so I actually, we were brigade champions in 3-on-3 basketball. We were double regimental champions in area hockey, which, by the way, I don't know how we got away with making that a sport. I mean, give a bunch of type A personalities sticks and let them get after each other in the area. And then I also did Sandhurst. That was actually one of the coolest experiences that I had at West Point. I was one of the first years that we got to do an exchange with the Sandhurst Military Academy. And so I went over during the summer between Cal and first year and did the final training exercise for Sandhurst, in which in theory it sounds really cool. And as a former infantryman, you would think that going and spending 2 weeks in the field up in northern Scotland would be great. It might be if you knew any fieldcraft. But first off, Scotland is always wet. Second off, even in July, it's freezing cold. And then they have these little bugs called midges that can find their way through any mosquito netting that you could ever think of. I actually wrapped a T-shirt around my head and cut out little eye holes and tied it around my head so that I could sit in an ambush position while getting eaten alive. But that experience locked it in for me that I was going to go infantry, because at the end of the day, you were exhausted. You hadn't slept much. You hadn't eaten much, but you felt like you had accomplished something. And so ultimately, that Sandhurst experience helped drive me towards the infantry.
Hey, sir, I'm going to pivot off that. So you said you started infantry, which sounds familiar to me. But for some reason, here you are 28 years later as a cyber general officer. Could you talk a little bit about the path that you navigated in order to get here today?
So first off, I wrote my first computer program when I was in the 6th grade. My dad was a command and general staff college student at Fort Leavenworth, and he bought an Apple IIc computer that you booted with a 5.5-inch floppy disk so that he could write his papers and do his homework. But one of the disks, 5.5-inch floppy disks that came with the Apple IIc, booted the basic programming language. And so I started tinkering around and toying around, and I wrote my first computer program when I was in 6th grade. And I kind of caught a bug for being able to take an idea from nothing, figure out how to code it, ultimately how to run a program and it achieve an outcome. And there's something just inherently rewarding about that process, which I think, frankly, we need to introduce to more young kids. But I studied computer science at West Point. I majored in computer science as a member of the EECS department. I passed most of my classes. I did okay academically. And as I left, the department head gave me a letter that said, hey, on down the road, you might be a candidate to come back and teach. Put this letter in your back pocket and give us a call when you're a captain. So graduated, went off to the infantry. My first duty station was Vicenza. I was in first the 508th Airborne Battalion Combat Team when 1508 was stationed in Vicenza. Unfortunately, broke my neck in a car accident, and I had to terminate jump status. So I moved from Vicenza up to Schweinfurt, Germany, where I joined 126 Infantry, the Blue Spaders, and served as a mechanized guy. So before I even went to the captain's career course, I had already been light and mech, had been airborne. I went to the captain's career course, could go either light or mech, chose 101st Airborne Division, and reported in. I had the distinct honor of commanding Bravo Company 1st of the 50 Deuce during the initial invasion of Iraq. Fought alongside some true heroes and warriors during the initial invasion. But after my company command time, that was when I pulled that letter back out of my rucksack and called West Point and said, hey, I'm interested in coming back and teaching. Do you have a spot for me? And they said, we do, assuming that you can earn your master's degree in computer science. So I went to the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, earned a master's degree in computer science, and then reported in as a newly promoted major to teach in the EECS department. I taught computer science. I was still an infantryman at the time. But then as I was in the department, I taught multiple different classes. I really gained an appreciation and honestly a passion for teaching, to be able to take what I called moldable clay of 18 young minds and be able to influence them through military experiences and through academic pursuits to be able to help them grow. And I really loved it. And I had decided that it was something that I could do permanently. And so I started looking at options to try to come back as a senior faculty member at West Point. Well, that requires earning a PhD. Well, at the time, no one in the infantry saw any utility in an infantryman with a PhD in computer science. So the infantry branch was not interested in allowing me to go earn my doctorate. So I transitioned into becoming a FA-24, which no longer exists. It sort of does. We've recoded that to being a FA-26 Alpha. So I was a network engineer. And I went to Johns Hopkins University to earn a PhD. While I was at Johns Hopkins, the Cyber Command stood up. And if you know your geography, Johns Hopkins is downtown Baltimore. Fort Meade, the home of U.S. Cyber Command, is about 20 miles south of Homewood campus of Hopkins. And so when I finished my dissertation, I looked and got a job over at U.S. Cyber Command. And then U.S. Cyber Command stood up cyber mission forces. It started to operationalize the concept of what it meant to execute defensive and offensive cyber operations. And there were opportunities to lead cyber mission forces. And so I called back up to West Point, who had paid for my doctorate, and had a conversation with then Colonel Ressler, now Brigadier General retired Ressler, the former department head in the EECS department. And I said, sir, can I get out of my obligation to come back and be a senior faculty member, because they've offered me an opportunity to command a brigade in the cyber world. And graciously, West Point absolved me of my responsibility to go back as a faculty member, and they allowed me to pursue the pathway in operational cyber forces. And I had the opportunity to command the Cyber Protection Brigade, en route to being the Deputy J3 at Cyber Command, en route to being the Deputy Commanding General of our Cyber, to the seat that I'm in now. Along the way, I went from infantry, brief stint as a network engineer, into becoming a cyber officer. How about yourself? Because I see both your Ranger Tab and CIB as well.
Yeah, that's exactly it, sir. Seems to be a trend in cyber branch of former infantrymen that have pursued something different. So, for me, my first computer was a Commodore 64. So I'm very familiar with BASIC. Ended up getting in the West Point. There I got to learn Pascal, my true favoriteest programming language. But then when I graduated, went infantry, but I was a mechanical engineering major. So I too got the letter, but unfortunately, I ended up getting tied up being a infantry officer basic course instructor at Fort Benning for a couple of years. So that burned a lot of my captain's time. So went into command, ended up backfilling you, whether you know it or not, in beautiful Mosul, Iraq. So got to spend a year of my life up there. And while I was an infantry guy, the Army made the decision that because I had a STEM degree, that I would be better suited as a functional area 24, a telecom engineer. So at that point in my life, I thought a switch was what turned on the lights in a room, but turned out that I had a gift for it and I enjoyed it a lot. Building networks, monitoring networks, defending networks. At that point, spent the next 5 years doing that. At some point in the mix, I got to go to Georgia Tech to get my master's, which was a phenomenal opportunity. And then I was sitting up in the Pentagon. And while I'm in the Pentagon, they announced something called Cyber Branch. And so my greatest skill as a child, you can ask my mom, was breaking and smashing things. So I decided, hey, why don't I sign up for Cyber Branch? And I was fortunate enough to be one of the first 100 to be inducted into the branch. From there, ended up going to Carnegie Mellon, fellowship at Carnegie Mellon, which was awesome. Being the oldest guy in a classroom surrounded by 20-somethings that have more knowledge than they do experience. Then I got to go to UCOM, run the Cyber Center at UCOM for a couple of years. And then I took command of the 780th, the sister brigade to the Cyber Protection Brigade. From there, ended up as your Cyber G3, and then picked up for Commandant of the Cyber School, and here I am today. So, Josh, what about you? What enticed you to come to Cyber Branch?
So in high school, I was introduced to computers. In my junior and senior year, they gave us a hardware class and a coding class. And I enjoyed the problem-solving process of coding and getting the computer to do what you wanted it to do. And while at West Point, I actually majored in economics, but I always still maintained my interest in cyber. For a brief period, I had a minor in cyber. And once I found out that we could branch cyber, I just went for it. And here I am.
So, Josh, let me dig into that. So, we're old grads. We didn't even have the option to branch cyber when we got commissioned. What are your feelings? What are your observations about being born into cyber branch versus those of us that got adopted in?
It's going to be a very interesting contrast because while in BOLC and currently I'm in the EW course, they always harp on how important it is to be able to translate cyber over to the maneuver side. And both yourself and General Stanton came from that maneuver side. And so that's going to be something that a lot of lieutenants have to learn, how to translate it to the maneuver side.
It's interesting that you're in the 17 Bravo course now, which I think will give you some opportunities to get out to a maneuver unit, get mud on your boots, sleep or don't sleep in the cold and the wet and the rain. And as we say in the infantry, embrace the suck, to then develop perspective for what cyber operations do and don't do in periods of competition and crisis. We talk about those things at the strategic level all the time, but the tools that we have in the cyber kit bag to deliver effects can offset the requirement to need to maneuver. So I'm excited for your near-term opportunities to finish up the course, get out to a maneuver unit in an EW platoon, and then we're going to ask you a couple of years from now the same question again. You can hold us to that.
Hey, sir, I'm going to ask you, and you can feel free to flip it back to me. What are the different roles of Cyber Branch? Because you mentioned 17 Bravos. We also know we have 17 Alphas. So would you care to articulate what the difference is?
Yeah. So at the high level, we have the Cyber Mission Force, folks that execute offensive cyber operations and defensive cyber operations at the operational to strategic level. And so you can be a member as a 17 Alpha, as an officer of a cyber protection team, or a offensively oriented support team or mission team. In that context, paint the picture of someone that is sitting at a keyboard, reaching through the network and achieving effects against either an adversarial system or defending against the adversary on a host system that we own. That's in contrast to our 17 Bravos that are our electronic warfare specialists that are breaking new ground in coordination with maneuver units to execute electronic surveillance, electronic protection, or electronic attack in coordination with the maneuver forces. So, how do you see yourself in the electromagnetic spectrum? How do you see the enemy? How do you see the effects that the enemy is attempting to achieve? How do you achieve effects against the enemy? All through the electromagnetic spectrum. We're watching the nature of warfare and combat evolve rapidly before our eyes when we look at what's happening in the Ukraine, where adversaries, where the Russians and Ukrainians are both using EW capabilities to find each other on the battlefield such that they can then achieve kinetic effects. They're also congesting and contesting the environment through abilities to jam communications. So our 17 Bravo electronic warfare officers are the ones that are planning and coordinating effects through the electromagnetic spectrum at the tactical edge in coordination with maneuver units. Our cyber mission forces operate, again, at the more operational strategic level, more putting hands on keyboard, reaching through networked environments to either attack and achieve effects or defend. How would you, as the commandant and proponent for the branch, elaborate on that?
Yeah, so the elevator speech I try to give to all the lieutenants, regardless of whether they're going to be in EW or cyber, is that offensive and defensive cyber is primarily fought in competition at the strategic and operational levels. And the whole point is to deny our adversaries the ability to gain an advantage and to protect our same in the information sphere. Then when we cross into conflict, the job of the 17Bs is to deny the adversary the use of the electromagnetic spectrum, force them back to carrier pigeons and runner on foot in order to deliver communications. Absolutely deny them the use of that information domain. One of the things I'm fond of saying is difference between the Army of 1923 and the Army of 2023 is cyber branch. It's what we do for the military mission.
I've heard you say that before, that the difference between 1923 and 2023 is the cyber branch. That's a fantastic way of expressing it. I'd add the nature of warfare is changing from strictly voice communications to becoming data centric, and our dependency on data that we convert into information and ultimately support making decisions is a critical change to our current and future operating environment. Increasingly, our formations, not just cyber operators, not just signaleers, but all of our formations, our infantrymen, our aviators, our field artillerymen, engineers, have to understand the role of data on the battlefield and where their dependencies on data reside, such that they can put the right data together, run the right analysis, develop the right visualization to enable their decision making. That's warfare from the beginning. That's what we did in 1923. The difference is that the proliferation of data has increased the dependency on moving ones and zeros. And because we have that dependency, that gives us in 2023 the opportunity to achieve effects against our adversary in the ones and zeros space, recognizing that they'll try to do the same to us. And so we must defend against it accordingly. So, Josh, you're hearing all this firsthand, a bunch of graybeard old grads pontificating about the utility of cyber. How do you see it from your foxhole as someone that's getting ready to go out to the maneuver unit?
Yes, sir. So I see 17 Alpha, 17 Bravo very similar to how you both see it. 17 Alpha is definitely are more so just interacting through cyberspace. I think we see that in terms of Russia and Ukraine right now, 17 Bravos are definitely going to be more useful in the future if warfare continues on that path, which it likely will.
What we've seen in the Ukraine is that if you look like military communications, your time window is about 8 minutes before the enemy sees you through the electromagnetic spectrum, readjusts their gun line, and sends indirect fire your way. So 8 minutes on the battlefield if you look like your military communications. That's forcing us to really think hard about how we communicate, what our signature looks like, how the enemy is going to attempt to see us, how we're going to attempt to see the enemy. And all of that is playing out in our world, in our branch for which we are going to be responsible. Exciting times, a lot of work to do, but exciting times.
Sir, your actual job title is the Commanding General of the Cyber Center of Excellence. Now, obviously, that implies more than simply doing cyber all day, every day. You also have to engage in the community. So, what role does the community play in the Army being successful at cyber?
Cyberspace operations are the ultimate team sport. I think leaders at Echelon have been saying and echoing that for a number of years now. One of my personal mentors, General Nakasone, I know has said that multiple times. There are multiple dependencies on executing cyber effects. And there are multiple avenues of approach for an enemy to attempt to achieve effects against us. There are dependencies on other governmental organizations, there are dependencies on academic institutions, there are dependencies on commercial companies. No one has the market cornered on how to understand the cyber operating environment or the cyber warfighting domain. So technical expertise, again, in academia, industry, government, combined together with tool sets and skills are what help us achieve effects. Partnerships are absolutely critical. The Cyber Center of Excellence is located at Fort Gordon, Georgia, in Augusta. In downtown, we have the Georgia Cyber Center, where the state of Georgia invested about $100 million in order to build out a collaborative center where industry, academia, and government can work together. We, alongside Army Cyber Command, take advantage of that facility to put smart people in a room working on a hard problem. And I categorize them as smart people on purpose because they can be green suiters, they can be from our sister services, they're academicians, and of course, they are industry partners. Putting those folks together, solving hard problems, is critically important for our future. It's the ultimate team sport.
Great, sir. And I think what I really appreciate about all the efforts you've done at the Cyber Center is trying to turn Augusta into a home instead of just a duty station. Every one of these soldiers has families that need to live here, kids that need to go to school here. Partnership with the community is incredibly important. Now, sir, we've heard mention of the Army Cyber Institute up at West Point, and the branch has put a significant investment of talent into the Army Cyber Institute. Can you talk about what the Army Cyber Institute does for the Army and cyber branch at large?
Yeah, so I have worked in coordination with the Army Cyber Institute since its inception, since it was a concept, since it was an idea. And here you have the opportunity to take a bunch of wicked smart folks, I'll use the doctrinal term wicked smart, that understand hard problems, that have the opportunity to work on hard problems and expand that network of connections into industry, academia, and research. So Army Cyber Institute's been doing that now for a decade. We in the Army have recently looked to reshape the focus of the future of the Army Cyber Institute. They need to be our think tank for the cyberspace warfighting domain. So we have hard problems thinking about the future of cyber doctrine, the future of our capabilities. Army Cyber has hard problems in the context of how do you infuse offensive and defensive cyber operations. We have really hard problems thinking about the concept of information advantage. We have hard problems thinking about the legal ramifications and implications associated with conducting operations in the cyberspace domain. The Army Cyber Institute's our think tank. It's where we go to ask hard problems to say, hey, here's the problem I ran into. I don't have the technical depth or expertise or time to solve this right now. Let me hand it to the Army Cyber Institute and have them come back to me in a relatively quick period of time to paint the relevance and put it into context. I also want the Army Cyber Institute to help us perform meaningful assessments. Are we headed in the right direction or not? Is this capability going to meet our needs? And have a impartial view of whether or not the capability we're building is actually solving the problem we intended it to. And the Army Cyber Institute is well postured to do that. I know recently West Point reoriented the Army Cyber Institute underneath the dean. And then subsequently, the dean delegated direct control to the department head of electrical engineering and computer science. Colonel Jim Rafferty and I have been longtime friends. We're working to drive the Army Cyber Institute to this role of being our think tank. It's exciting.
Yes, sir. I think the work they do at Army Cyber Institute is phenomenal. It really keeps us on the cutting edge and tries to keep us away from the bleeding edge of technology.
I love that distinction. That's the first time I've heard the difference between the cutting and bleeding edge, but absolutely.
I just made that up,
well
so
said.
I'm going to put that in my OER support form. So I know you've been up to West Point, and it's really tough to notice when you go up to Grand Hall, where we used to pick up Shade's Pizza, and to not see the massive construction site that's happening in order to build the Cyber and Engineering Academy Center up at West Point. For the grads that haven't been there, and Josh, if you haven't been back up there, they literally have cut out a whole side of the mountain next to admissions. So, sir, what do you see the value of building the Cyber and Engineering Academy Center?
Well, first off, they displaced the Gold Coats, which gives me great heartburn because the Gold Coats are now under the direction of a good friend, Colonel Ed Tague, in Washington Hall because they had to make room for the new Academy Center. Hey, but talk about thinking through how to take multidiscipline challenges that have a cyber problem associated with them and put them together. That's absolutely the direction we need the academy to drive our current cadets that will be future graduates. It's not so much about being able to address the known problem. It's about being able to respond with agility to a problem that you didn't foresee. And those problems don't come in very narrow flavors or very isolated cases of one discipline. They oftentimes overlap significantly. The Academy Center is going to present the opportunity to study really hard cyber problems in the broader context of engineering writ large. I think it's phenomenal. It'll give cadets the time and space and the place to go to do interdisciplinary research and pursue educational opportunities.
The multidisciplinary approach is absolutely the way forward. So we see it in a lot of our lieutenants. I think contrary to popular belief, not all the lieutenants we bring in the cyber branch have computer science degrees. Vast majority do. A lot of them have electrical engineering degrees, but we also pull in mechanical engineers, other STEM degrees, specifically because of what it provides to the branch, because not all problems are going to be solved necessarily on a keyboard, even if the solution is enabled by one.
Josh is an econ major, for crying out loud, having done a study abroad in Chile. So, I think Josh is a great example of, having an interest, a little bit of hardware, a little bit of software in the background. Probably did IT 105, not with Turbo Pascal, but with a more modernized programming language. Josh, your thoughts on the interdisciplinary nature and the intent of the Academy Center?
I think the Academy Center is a great idea. I think it's going to provide more opportunities for cadets, like you said, to get more practice and get better research. I think it's going to produce cyber lieutenants that are more prepared and ready to tackle the new cyber problems.
I think I'm a huge fan of Projects Day. I've been back to the Academy twice as an evaluator during Projects Day. And I guess about a decade or so ago, there was a educational review board that said Project Stay needed to be much more interdisciplinary. And we need to purposefully align cadets from different departments with each other to drive projects. And they're always, the cadets always find a way, breach or bypass, get through the obstacle. Cadets are going to figure it out. But oftentimes they've had to do just that, innovate their way out of an environment to put their project together. We want them spending their time on solving the project, not on figuring out, who's going to do the Boodler's run and what room they're going to get together in. And the Cyber and Engineering Academy Center is intended to help provide that space and the resources to be able to do these interdisciplinary projects.
So, Josh, I'm going to have to ask you, do you know what a Boodler's runner is?
Oh, boy. I dated myself without even
The Corps
realizing
has.
Boodler's is no more, but you know what a Boodle box is, though, right, Josh?
I'm sorry, sir. I don't.
Oh, boy.
So, Josh, let me ask you this. So this morning, as I was aligning all of my hangers 2 fingers apart, are there any habits that you've taken from West Point that you're still doing today?
I will say I still use my green girl. I do fold it. The same way that was folded at West Point. I do fold it the exact same way.
So did you make your bed with your green girl? Did you make your bed with your gray blanket? Or did you send your gray blanket out in the laundry constantly in order to avoid making it with the gray blanket?
Oh, never. Once the bed was made at the beginning of the semester, it was never touched again. I used my green girl and just tacoed myself in it. Did you sleep in your bed, sir?
Oh, breaking sheets? Breaking sheets? Not a chance. So there's some things that clearly can outlast 25-year differences between graduates. And making the hospital corners and doing it right one time.
What habits did you do, 28 years ago that you're still doing today?
I line up my shoes underneath my bed. They're lined up just like they would have been if we were going to have a Sammy. Oh, there we go again. Josh, do you know what Sammy is?
Yes, sir. We still have Sammy at least once a semester.
Okay, good. All right. But you don't have WPRs on Sammy Day. That's good. We could figure out how to put WPRs during the academic school day.
See, I still put my laundry in a mesh bag and put it outside the door, and it magically gets washed. So some things haven't changed.
Yeah, but does it come back with pitchfork holes in it?
Yeah, just don't tell my wife I said that. She is not listening to this podcast.
That's right.
So, gentlemen, we're going to close this out. And what I'm going to ask for is any advice that you would give to a young cadet that's going to join or looking to join Cyber Branch. So, Josh, I'll go to you first.
I would say don't be deterred if you don't have that large of a background in cyber, if you don't have much experience with coding. I think the different perspective that you can have from a different major will add a lot of value to the branch. And so my advice is if you want something, go for it.
Sir, what about you?
Apply yourself academically. Work at it. Take the opportunities that you have while you're a cadet and honestly study hard, because the ability for the United States Army to continue to be the best Army in the world is predicated on our ability to execute through mission command. So let me offer intent, let me give you left and right limits, and then let you execute with discipline initiative. But that implies that you have competence. And in the cyber warfighting domain, competence is a combination of your technical skills, your character, and your leadership. You need all three. And while you're a cadet, you have the opportunity to build all three. So apply yourself. Take every class seriously. Build that rock solid foundation such that you can be a lifelong learner, such that you can be able to operate effectively in a nebulous environment of uncertainty, which you will definitely face when you graduate. So prepare yourself and apply the individual effort to build that rock solid technical foundation so that you can be technically competent as a member of the cyber force when you join the active component.
Yeah, absolutely, sir. So for any cadet that wants to lead the most skilled technical soldiers in the United States Army against some of our most demanding tasks, cyber's the branch.
This has been a production of the WPAOG Broadcast Network. Please take a moment to rate and review the show and join us each week for a new episode. Thank you for listening.